Hello, my name is Dr. Kara Dillon, and the goal of this channel is to make academic subjects easier to understand. In the last video, we looked at the history of sociology and early sociologists. In this video, we're going to look at the three main theories or paradigms of sociology. So let's begin. It is through observing, analyzing, and recording social events and people's social interactions and patterns that sociologists start developing ideas about the inner workings of groups. In sociology, a theory serves as a way to explain these social interactions, influences, and patterns. By using the social interactions, patterns, and influences as the basis of their theory, sociologists can create a testable proposition which is known as a hypothesis. You may have heard a hypothesis defined as an educated guess, which could be considered true if the researcher is basing their hypothesis on unbiased social patterns and interactions that have been established. So saying a hypothesis is an educated guess doesn't really tell the whole story. Those scientific observations and its patterns definitely need to be noted and recorded. When it comes to sociological theories, there can be macro-level theories as well as micro-level theories depending upon the size of the group that's being studied and how influential their shared ideas are. It's important to note that groups are constantly changing and never remain the same. Studies that involve groups of people are never finished because group dynamics continually shift and change. In sociology, you might hear the word paradigm. Paradigms are defined as broad theories that can help explain various features of social life. Paradigms can serve as a framework or kind of like an outline that helps sociologists to create theories, make observations, and conduct experiments. So I know that can sound kind of confusing, but I'm going to introduce three sociological frameworks that are best known and used in sociology. These aren't the only social frameworks or paradigms that exist, but they tend to be the ones that are used the most, and you will see these in class. These frameworks include structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. The first paradigm or framework is structural functionalism, or you may have heard it being referred to as functionalism. I feel like the best way to understand functionalism is to use Herbert Spencer's analogy of society being like a human body. A human body has so many integral parts, such as various organ systems, organs, fluids, etc., and they all have to work together to keep somebody alive. So let's say that the brain represents education, the heart represents family, the blood circulating the body represents the economy, and the skeletal system, which holds a person up, represents government, and the lungs represent religion. Education, family, the economy, government, and religion are known as social institutions. If you were to study anatomy and physiology, each part of the body can be studied independently for its own parts. The brain has lobes, older and newer portions, neurons, and transmitters. The institution of education is the same way. We can look at education as a whole, or we can break it down and look at its parts. Neurons are a tiny integral portion of the brain, and in education, we could simplify it so much that maybe we're just looking at individual learning styles. We can do that with all of our social institutions in this body. We know that if the heart begins having problems, the family, or there's something wrong with our blood flow, the economy, it's going to impact all of our social institutions in various ways. This is the essence of functionalism. Just as parts of the human body have to work together to make the whole human function, so do social institutions that exist within a society. There are two terms that are described in relation to these social processes. These terms are latent functions and manifest functions. Manifest functions are the actual consequences that take place that are either anticipated or sought after. Latent functions are consequences that take place that are not sought after. As an example, a manifest function of having a medical examination once a year might be continued health, updating medications that are needed to live, and gaining knowledge about new medical technologies. Latent functions of getting an exam once a year might include meeting a new friend in the medical waiting room, getting free samples of foot cream, and finding out that you gained 10 extra pounds you didn't even know about. Latent functions can be desired, not desired, or be neutral. When latent functions are undesired, they are called dysfunctions. One of the biggest criticisms of functionalism is that it doesn't necessarily explain social change very well. In this theory, there's a very circular dynamic concerning the social institutions. If that was the case, society would not necessarily evolve. Functionalism doesn't explain why dysfunctions exist or why they may or may not change given time. The second sociological theory, which is also known as the paradigm or framework, is called conflict theory. This theory sets forth the idea that the earth is finite, meaning there are a certain amount of resources that exist and that human beings are in competition for these limited resources. Social institutions like government, education, and religion do exist, but these institutions show a lack of equality between those that have resources and those that do not. These institutions in many ways help to maintain inequalities between different groups of people. Karl Marx saw society and its social classes or economic classes as defining which people had access to education, government, employment, housing, and extra time for themselves. Those individuals that can gain money and power often have the most time, money, and influence to maintain various social institutions and their inner workings that oftentimes maintain inequality. Max Weber believed that conflicts caused by social and political inequalities eventually led to upheavals and struggles. He was one of the first to note that groups of people with different educational levels, different genders, and different races and their reactions to their inequalities could impact society and its evolution. Jorge Simmel stated he believed that conflict eventually would help to stabilize a society. He recognized that group solidarity, emotional involvement, and the clarity of the group's goals would help to define the eventual success or lack thereof by the group. Simmel synthesized that if a group can clearly communicate its goals and reduce tension, aggression, and violent tendencies, it could eventually lead to future agreements and resolutions. Those that are critical of the conflict theory state that there is too much focus on conflict and no recognition of the stabilities of social structure. Social institutions are capable of change, but generally not very quickly, and conflict theory seems to ignore the fact that social structures have and do continue to progress. The third sociological theory or paradigm is known as symbolic interactionism. This theory is generally seen as a micro-level theory because it focuses on communications and interactions between small groups of people. In sociology, communication is defined as a language and symbols that are shared between people, helping to make sense of the social world around them. George Herbert Mead is considered the founder of symbolic interactionism. His basic idea stated that humans interact with items because of their shared meanings of those items. Humans know these shared meanings because they interact with others about them. Generally, the interactions between people and their life circumstances have to be interpreted and agreed upon, so these agreed upon meanings define symbolic interactionism. A sociologist that believes in symbolic interactionism looks for patterns that exist between individuals or small groups. For example, if a group of people decided to protest, a symbolic interactionist will look for patterns in the signs and symbols protesters use to communicate. Are protesters raising their hands or arms in a common sign? What does this sign mean? What does it symbolize? I just watched the Hunger Games last night where the symbol of the mockingjay and a hand signal symbolized resistance of the central government. Those critics of symbolic interactionism state that observation, data collection, and interpretation are often biased, especially by culture. Other sociological researchers believe that symbolic interactionism is too narrow a focus in relation to studying groups as a whole. Those that believe in symbolic interactionism state that being able to study groups at such a small level is a strength because it can eventually explain how larger social movements evolve and change society. Well, that's the end of the video concerning the major theories of sociology. If you like the video, please help me out by clicking that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Keep working hard for those grades, and I will talk with you soon.